Hi there, and welcome to Fuzzy on the Details. My name is Fuzzy, and if you want to learn more about the Marvel Multiverse role-playing game, you've come to the right place. Today, we're beginning a deep dive into all of the new rules recently published in the X-Men expansion. And as I mentioned in my review, this book is chock full of them. We're going to start with vehicle rules. If there's a rule you'd like me to cover next, please let me know in the comments. I will definitely prioritize based on your input. In addition to all of the new vehicle rules that appear in the X-Men expansion, I'm going to be talking about the necessary context from the Core Rulebook and Cataclysm of Kang as well. There are a few tangential rules that are really important to keep in mind, and I'll be sure to highlight those along the way. And finally, we will wrap up with some guidance about how to do your own homebrew, whether it's modifying the basic vehicles provided in the book, or statting up vehicles that are mentioned in the book but don't have profiles, like the Pack Rat from the X-Force chapter. Ready? Let's get into the details. Let's start with the basics of operating a vehicle. The first thing to keep in mind is that mundane actions do not require rolls in this game. They happen automatically. So if your character is just driving a car that they know how to operate under normal circumstances, no checks are necessary. Checks only come into play when something challenging or out of the ordinary happens, like navigating a tough turn at high speed or encountering an unexpected hazard in the road. In these cases, the driver or pilot must make an agility check to maintain control, using a move action on their turn. Remember, if your character has the piloting trait from the Core Rulebook, they get an edge on any rolls that come up during your movement action. If a character is successful in navigating the hazard, all is good. They've spent their movement action to do so, but they still have their standard action, which of course they could use to take another movement. If a character fails this roll, well, they've still spent their move action, but they lose control of the vehicle. They can immediately use a reaction and/or their standard action to make another agility check to regain control. So why is losing control bad? Well, for one, if no one is piloting the vehicle, then the target number to hit it is 10. And, depending on the circumstance, the narrator could rule that the vehicle crashes. Now, there's one thing that's not explicitly mentioned in the X-Men book, and that's what target number should you use for a hazard that would trigger one of these rolls to maintain control. That's easy, just follow the guidance in the Core Rulebook. The narrator sets the target number based on this situation. So let's say that Captain America wants to ride his motorcycle at full speed through the difficult terrain of a German forest to reach the Hydra enemies as quickly as possible. The narrator might think this is difficult, but not ridiculous. Cap is rank 4, so the base level difficulty is 14, and we get to 16 because the difficult modifier is +2. Alternately, let's say that Wolverine 97 is in his Jeep driving Madeline Pryor to the hospital to deliver baby Nathan. He's on a paved road, but taking the turn at a relatively high speed. Maybe the narrator considers this only challenging, so there's no modifier to the target number, and we go with 14 since Wolverine is also rank 4. Everything is relative. So what happens if the vehicle you are driving is attacked and damaged during combat? The Core Rulebook also has rules for that in the Attacking Objects section. If a vehicle is hit, the driver must make an agility check to maintain control using the amount of damage taken as the target number. Now, technically, piloting is not going to apply here in most cases because piloting specifically grants an edge on action checks during your movement turn. And most of the time, your vehicle is going to take damage on an enemy's turn. Me personally, I would house rule that the character could apply the edge here, because honestly, the piloting trait doesn't get used very often, but that's just my campaign. But rules as written, you would not apply the edge. Let's take a look at vehicle stats now. These are represented in two ways in the book. You've got basic vehicles, which appear in this chart, and you also have a full vehicle profile that has additional information in it. We'll take a look at that shortly. I am so happy that this chart is in the book, and the reason is it becomes so much easier to homebrew your own vehicles when you have a foundational set of stats to compare against. The speed column here represents the vehicle's tactical speed, the number of spaces you can move in combat after initiative is rolled. It is not meant to be a precise measure of how fast a vehicle is outside of combat. Vehicles have their own independent health score. When this value is reduced to half, the listed speed is also reduced by half. When health reaches 0 or lower, the vehicle is no longer functional. It can still be repaired though, just like an unconscious character can still be healed. But if the vehicle gets knocked down to negative its health value, so negative 100 health if it's a car, It is destroyed and can't be repaired. Again, not unlike characters that are dead at negative their health score. If characters are in a vehicle when it's destroyed, the damage of the last attack is applied to all of the occupants in that vehicle. Occupants can avoid damage as normal with damage reduction or other means like phasing powers. The book also provides details of how to handle crashes depending on what your movement mode was. Lots of great guidance here that will cover most scenarios. Vehicles do not have their own melee or agility defense scores because they use their pilot's abilities. If a vehicle is not piloted, the defense score is 10. And finally, vehicles have a size and they can also have powers. Now, before we cover how powers work in the new X-Men expansion, let's talk a little bit about some of the vehicle advice that was presented in Cataclysm of Kang. As you see here, this was presented as guidelines, specifically guidelines on how to use the vehicles in this specific adventure. In Cataclysm of Kang, powers for these vehicles were granted to the pilot, occupants, or users of the vehicle. Now, while this worked with the vehicles in Cataclysm of Kang, which were pretty straightforward, this will absolutely not work with the vehicles presented in the X-Men expansion. Let's take a look at Ava as an example. Ava is a self-healing ship that can change its shape, but if we use the Cataclysm of Kang guidelines, anyone who entered the vehicle would be granted the power to shape change, and they get a healing factor for as long as they were in the vehicle, which is just not how this vehicle is supposed to function. Rules that are part of a formal expansion to the game should absolutely trump guidelines for how to handle one part of an adventure. So, my recommendation is for you to forget these guidelines from Cataclysm of Kang. In fact, I'm going to delist my old video on vehicles because these guidelines are just not compatible with the actual fully fleshed out rules that we have now. So, how do powers work with these new rules? Let's take a look at another vehicle profile in the game for an example. The Blackbird here has several offensive capabilities. The profile tells you explicitly how each power works. In the notes, it says that the weapons are controlled by the operator. As the rules on the right state, that means that on their standard action, the pilot of the ship can use their own stats to control that weapon, paying focus costs as normal. The pilot must also pay the cost to use any of the other powers, like 5 focus for going invisible. Some important considerations here. If you're playing in a campaign where you're going to use vehicles a lot, you're probably going to want your pilot to have a high focus. Also, the rule that you cannot spend more than 5 times your rank in focus still applies. So, a rank 1 character can't just hop on the Blackbird and use Elemental Barrage because they cannot spend more than 5 focus at one time, and Elemental Barrage costs 15 focus. Some weapons are listed as automated and will have their own stats. These fire independently at the end of the pilot's turn. There would be no special effect on a fantastic success as there is no power being used with them, and these are neither blunt nor sharp weapons. Alright, now let's showcase how quickly you can homebrew your own vehicles. First, it's important to note you've got carte blanche to do that, written right here in the book. You can modify these existing stats to suit your own needs. You want a speedboat? Great! Maybe double the speed of the regular boat and remove sturdy 1. You want an ATV? Take the motorcycle stats, maybe halve the speed, and give it the ability to ignore difficult terrain. Go nuts! You can also build a vehicle completely from scratch. The X-Force chapter in this book mentions a vehicle called the Pack Rat 2. We don't have a profile for it in the book, so let's start it up ourselves. First, start with the concept. Remember, it doesn't have to be a perfect reflection of the vehicle as it exists in the comics. This is your version of the vehicle, in your game, in your world. However you decide to start it up is by definition correct. Now, from the comics I remember reading, the Pack Rat was sleek, fast, and it had VTOL capabilities. That's really important to keep in mind because of this rule. Aircraft that do not have vertical takeoff and landing cannot engage in regular combat. The Pack Rat 2 was relatively small, especially compared to the Blackbird, and I remember a couple of interior shots in the comics, and it looks like it could hold about 6 passengers, give or take. I like this image with the ramp here, which would allow for quick pickup or drop-off in a hostile zone. Since the Pack Rat 2 has to get pretty close to the enemies to do this, in my mind it would have to be pretty tough. I don't remember it having a lot of weapons though, which is fine if you've got X-Force on board. I mean, just pop the hatch in the back and you can have your characters shoot out if you needed to. The original Pack Rat also had cloaking technology, so let's give the same thing to Pack Rat 2, especially if we're not going to be adding weapons to it. Using helicopter stats as a base, let's give it 100 health and a size of huge. But let's make it faster than a helicopter and give it a speed of 36, which is what a plane has. For number of passengers, I've got 6, but you could squeeze a couple of more in. They just wouldn't have seats and harnesses, which might be a problem in the event of a crash. It gets its damage reduction from Sturdy 1 as it was designed for close contact with the enemy in hostile situations. Looking at the other powers, invisibility is there to represent cloaking. Now, the original Pack Rat definitely had that technology. I don't recall seeing the Pack Rat 2 specifically having it, but in my mind, the second incarnation of the vehicle wouldn't take a step backwards there, so I like having it. For flavor, maybe we'll say that the invisibility cloaking can't be active when the hatch is open. And that's it. It's pretty easy and kind of fun to do. And if you wanted to upgrade it further, why not? Maybe your heroes destroy an enemy vehicle and can salvage a weapon off of the wreckage. If you've got access to a lab, have a character make a logic check and see if you can incorporate it into your vehicle. These kinds of upgrades or salvage can simulate loot in your game, and you can kind of rank up your vehicle as you go. I'm really interested to know your take on these rules. Are you more likely to use vehicles in your games now? Are there unique vehicles you'd like to see published profiles for in future expansions? Me, I think there's room to flesh out these rules a little bit more for space combat and would love to see a profile for the Milano. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. That's all I've got for today, true believers. Thanks as always for all of your support. The game is in such a healthy and exciting place right now with so many new players coming to it every day. All of your likes, shares, and subscribes really help these videos get seen by all of those fresh new eyes. So keep it up. I hope you all have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video.